Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Glasgow Rangers Nation, the channel that brings you all your latest Rangers news. We're going to talk a few bits and pieces today. We're going to talk about the result last night, Celtic obviously winning in the Scottish Premier League. We're going to talk about Jacob Murphy as well, and how his success last night for Newcastle relates to Rangers. We're also going to talk a little bit of transfer window stuff, a little bit of Craig Moore as well, and have a little bit of a start to look ahead to the game against Queen's Park in the Cup, which is upcoming. Well, I mean, bad news last night was that Celtic did win. They won in quite convincing fashion. They won 6-0 against Dundee. Quite rampant, played quite well by all accounts. A game that maybe there was a hope that Dundee could do something, get a point maybe, or stop them in some way, but it didn't happen. Celtic, as you can see from the table on the screen, are up to 66 points now, back to 13 points clear of Rangers at the top of the league. Look, I'm going to be 100% honest with you, and I know a lot of fans don't like this comment and won't like this comment and will, call me all sorts of names under the sun because they love abusing. I think that this league, we can all see now that the league is done and dusted. It's over. It's finished. I mean, if you honestly believe that Celtic are going to lose 4 to 5 games, they're going to have to lose 4, draw 1, or lose 5 games this season, 5 more games this season, then I genuinely cannot see that happening. Even if Rangers were to beat them twice, which would take the league down to 7 points, you've still then got to find 3 other teams that are going to beat them. And I think looking at the league as it is at the moment, Dundee United seem to be falling away. Aberdeen, the wheels have well and truly come off. Hibernian haven't been able to beat them recently. Motherwell lost to them recently. Hearts are on the rebuild, but I can't see them really. They're not that great a team this year. St Mirren are falling away. Killie are climbing again, but other than playing them at Rugby Park, at Celtic Park, they're limited success there. Dundee, obviously, as we've seen last night, Ross County and St Johnstone, well, you can just forget that one. So, look, I mean, realistically, unfortunately, our way form has cost us the title. And, sitting here on the 6th of February to say that the title's already done and dusted and you might as well give them the trophy really is a sad reflection of where Rangers currently are as a team, and what the state that Philippe Clement has us in at this moment in time. I know results have picked up in recent weeks, but I still firmly believe that the right decision will be to sack him at the end of the season and bring in a real manager who can coach this team and improve this team. I do believe we've got a core of some very good players at this club, and with the right coaching and the right development, they could become a very, very potent force in Scotland. Not necessarily maybe as much in Europe, but definitely in Scotland. So look, I think I'm still of that view that Clement needs to go. I don't rate the guy. I think he's a poor coach. I think his teams are boring. I think his tactics are poor. I think he plays players out of position. His substitutions, in-game management is poor. I honestly believe if Clement stays next season, they'll win the league again and win it quite comfortably. Right, so let's touch on another game that happened last night. That was Newcastle United beating Arsenal 2-0 in the Carabao Cup semi-final. It means that Newcastle obviously get to the final with a 4-0 aggregate victory over the most deluded, arrogant fans in England and possibly in Europe. Arsenal fans, if you ever fancy a laugh, watch AFTV, guys. They are, without a shadow of a doubt, the most deluded fans on planet Earth. I laugh at them. I genuinely laugh at them. After they beat Man City at the weekend 5-1, apparently they were the greatest team in the world. They were going to win the Champions League. They were going to win the Carabao Cup. They were going to win every trophy in the world. And then last night they lose, and suddenly it's a Mickey Mouse Cup that doesn't matter. Yeah, okay. Jacob Murphy, anyway. Jacob Murphy, who scored for Newcastle last night, was a player who was previously linked with Rangers during Steven Gerrard's time. A player that has gone from being a target for Rangers to being a regular for Newcastle and a hero for the Magpies, obviously helping them to get to a final. Gerrard was very interested in bringing Murphy to the club to bring balance to the wings. Obviously, he had Ryan Kent on the left, and there was talk of Jacob Murphy coming in and playing on the right side. At the time when Gerrard mooted this possibility, Rangers fans weren't very happy about it and branded Jacob Murphy a flop and a poor player. Unfortunately, it does show that perhaps we do rush to judge players. If you look at the success he is now having for Newcastle, and also on verge of selection to the England national team as well. But an interesting one nonetheless, that he's gone on to have such amazing success. Obviously, a player as well that would be worth, I think his current market value is between 12 and 15 million pounds. So again, it's a value that's massively increased. Maybe this shows that had Steven Gerrard been properly backed and had Steven Gerrard been given money and given the freedom to sign who he wanted, this club could be in a very different place right now. Not just in terms of competing regularly in the league with Celtic. Gerrard's record against Celtic is by far better than Gio's, by far better than Michael Beale's, and certainly by far better than Philippe Clement's. But also Gerrard, had he been backed fully, I think would have taken this team on in Europe. And also helped us up the trading model. I mean, this is a player, Jacob Murphy, like I said, whose value has vastly increased, who, a couple of seasons with us, maybe then sell him back to England. We make a massive profit on him. Maybe this trading model that is now kind of been fought to set up, and we are struggling to set it up due to the lack of money to bring in players that we can then sell. Maybe back then, if we had backed Gerrard fully, if Douglas Park had not been the absolute moron that he really is, then the club would be in a different position. But, interesting story nonetheless about Jacob Murphy and his previous link to Rangers. Okay, so look, Craig Moore, former Rangers player, Australian international, a guy who has been a sporting director, he's been a director, he's now an agent, a guy who understands football. Someone who I think Rangers fans have been quite positive about and have actually wanted to include him in the include him and bring him into the club, whether as a sporting director before Niels Koppen was appointed, but some sort of scout, certainly his understanding of what makes a good player and identifying good players is quite clearly there. Craig Moore, speaking to Australian media, has criticised Rangers for their lack of reaching out to former players around the world to help access other foreign markets and look at good players. Moore, who has obviously got a great knowledge of the Australian game and Japanese game, could have certainly identified us some players, that wouldn't have cost an arm and a leg and a fortune from Australia, from Japan, that may have helped in squad building. There is other players, obviously, that play all over the world, former players, who we could have reached out to. Craig Moore says that the club have been very short-sighted in not using these contacts. Now, obviously, it's to be hoped now that Niels Koppen is in charge and is the sporting director, the director of football, whatever his position is officially called. And we now seem to be looking at other markets, for example, the Moroccan market, obviously the signing of the assistant manager as well, who's from Morocco, looking at the African market, looking at the South American market, looking at the Scandinavian market, as an example of Rangers actually doing what Craig Moore has called for us to do. I think the club have in the past been very short-sighted in how we've used former players, in our knowledge, in our scouting, in our looking beyond our shores. I mean, I think part of the issue we've had in previous years is very much poor recruitment. If you look at the players that have been signed by Michael Beale, players that were signed by Ross Wilson for Gio, there were some very poor signings there, some very bad players signed. Lots of players coming from the English Championship who failed in the English Championship, who were injury prone in the English Championship, and yet there was some kind of false sense of belief that bringing them up here would suddenly turn them into world-class players or top-class players, which has proven to be utterly false. I think look, props to Koppen. Koppen I think is doing a very good job. He's brought in some decent players. Yes, he's had the odd disaster. Let's face it, Oscar Cortez does look like a bit of an absolute white elephant, but Mohamed Diamonde looks a good player. Connor Barron looks a good player. I'm sure Lyle Cameron will be a very good player. Hamza Igerman looks a good player. Clinton Enciala looks a good player. So, Koppen certainly seems to be doing a very good job at the moment. But I think Craig Moore's right. We should be reaching out to people like Craig, people like the Boer brothers, Christian Nerlinger, people like that, who have got a knowledge of other markets, who can bring us some expertise. At a point where we are, massively behind that lot from across the city, we do need, as much help as we can get to build ourselves back up and put ourselves back in a position to challenge, so that league table doesn't look quite so bad as it does at this moment in time. But there's lots of might have beens for Rangers, and I think for me, one of the biggest things we need to do as a club is to change, to evolve, to modernise, to use contacts, to use scouting networks, to use AI-driven data, to use a lot of sources to try and build this team back up. In terms of this team moving forward, there is, I think, a plan clearly there now in terms of, setting up the trading model, bringing in young players who can be sold on for big profits. I think, there is obviously the whole the need to make it into the Champions League next season, and as we spoke about on the podcast last night, and I mean, I'll be honest with you, all these people that come out with this narrative of, the Europa League's our level, I don't want to get pumped in the Champions League. I think it just shows the sad mediocrity that a lot of our fans now accept, that they accept us being a second-rate team to Celtic and a mediocre team. I think fans who sit there and genuinely say, the Europa League's our level, I don't want to play in the Champions League because we're going to get beaten. Well, number one, don't understand how the Champions League has changed in terms of the teams. Look at who Celtic played this season, or a lot of teams there we could have beaten. And also as well are just quite happy to accept us to be mediocre, and I think are quite happy to accept us to being second to them. If you're saying that the Europa League's not for, is the competition we should be playing in, and the Champions League not for us, then you're quite happy to say give Celtic a £30 million head start every season, which will just lead to them moving further and further and further ahead. It's a very, very mediocre attitude. It's a very much an attitude of accepting mediocrity. And a very poor attitude, in my opinion. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. We've also got a situation at this club, I think, where finally we've got in Koppen someone who can make the right decisions, can bring in decent players. And I think also the model that we are moving to is moving away from the manager signing players, so that if the manager is sacked and got rid of, it will not be a case of, oh God, we've got to get rid of all these players and bring in new players. These players are signed by Nils Koppen, and they will look for a manager who can work with this type of player. That is the way that modern clubs are run. That's how clubs in England are run. When Liverpool replaced Jurgen Klopp with Arne Slot, they looked at a similar type of manager who could come in and work with Klopp's players. I'm sure if Tottenham sack Postecoglou, they will look for someone who can come in and work with those players. It's the same at Manchester United when Ten Hag was sacked. They looked at Amorim, can he work with, and looking at can he work with those players. At the moment, it isn't working out because the players just are genuinely shite. But look, and if Arsenal were to sack Arteta tomorrow, again, it will be a case of them going and looking to someone who could work with those similar sort of players, so they're not having to spend vast sums of money on regenerating squads. That's the modern way of doing things. Guys, I'd love to know your thoughts on what we've covered in this video today. Thank you for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation, guys. As always, on the way out, please smash that like, sub to the channel, and remember always, please never forget, we are the people.